Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is not a video podcast, so
Yeah, I figured. You know.
because of us.
No, because of me.
You gotta look at us, and she's like, "Yeah, I understand that. That's a smart business decision."
Sonia, do you have a last name?
Yes, I do. It's Lenegan.
Lenegan?
Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
And you're an immigration attorney or just an attorney, or what do you do?
Well, I wonder how many sort of terminology issues we're going to have during this chat, but I'm a solicitor. So I'm a qualified solicitor. I do immigration, asylum, and public law. I am also the legal and policy director for a charity that works with LGBTQI plus people who are in the UK seeking asylum. So yeah, I do that part-time, and then I do several other things in my free time.
Do you wear a wig in court?
I don't. Barristers are the ones who wear wigs.
Duh.
And only in certain courts. I try not to learn all of their weird rules.
She's a solicitor, not a barrister, Matthew.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like an idiot.
Idiot.
I mean, honestly, I find it all quite complex, their weird rules. They have to, like, eat dinner to become a qualified barrister. It's all very odd.
Oh, I can do that. I'm like really good at eating dinner. It's like one of my strong points.
There's a thing sort of, I don't know, I feel like this is ingrained in like American culture that if you have a British accent, it comes across as very intelligent, no matter sort of what you're saying. And I'm wondering if the opposite is true. Like if we just sound like the dumbest people that you've ever talked to.
My partner is American.
Oh, okay. So yes.
So I am going to maintain silence.
Oh, no.
I mean, because even like you look at Boris Johnson, and he looks like a buffoon. He looks like a complete idiot. But when he talks, we listen to him and we're like,
He must know what he's doing. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's horrifying.
I mean, not really.
I
but-
mean, we have Trump who talks like he looks.
Yeah.
So it's not confusing at all for us.
And we wanted to feel a little bit better about our immigration system. So we decided to have a battle for last place. Whose system is worse? I wanted to start maybe with the good. So before Trump was elected, we had somebody on from New Zealand because we were looking into where we could move in case he won. And there were some quite nice things about their immigration system. Like if you happened to be in New Zealand and you had a girlfriend there, you could just get a work permit and stay kind of forever. And these were things that seemed really foreign to Matthew and I because we make everything so hard. So are there any cool, good things about your immigration system? And how hard would it be for Matthew and I to move to England?
Well, I think you would probably be wanting to come under some sort of work route, which I don't really deal with. So you'd need to get advice from someone much better than I am at those sort of things. As far as good news is concerned, not in the area of asylum, but in relation to immigration, it is possible, the situation that you mentioned, where if you have, so for example, recently I had a case where it was a British citizen and their partner was a person who didn't have leave to be in the UK. They had overstayed their visa a few years ago. And it was possible to get that person leave to remain. So they now have status and they were able to go off and get married and they're now, living their lives in the UK as they should be. So it's possible, but everything is getting worse and worse and more difficult here.
So the way we know Sonia is I follow you on Twitter. It's the way you know anybody nowadays, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you met anyone outside of Twitter, Stephen, in the past 5 years? You haven't, have you?
No.
So I was just following your Twitter feed, and you were kind of complaining that your asylum seekers only get 41 pounds a week.
Oh, yeah.
And Stephen?
I think that's a fair complaint.
Stephen, do you want to kind of, maybe if we have UK listeners, what our asylum seekers get?
What is a pound? It's like is it like $2.50?
No, I think it's nothing.
No, but I mean, what is the conversion rate right now? Because I need to convert 0 to pounds. Yeah.
Oh.
Tell us if I'm an asylum seeker, let's say, what's a popular country of origin that you deal with?
Well, let's say Iran or Afghanistan.
Okay, so I'm from Iran and I'm in the UK. Take me through the process. What happens? What benefits do I get? What does that whole process look like?
Well, in relation to asylum support, yes, it is. If they are otherwise destitute, then they can access asylum accommodation and apparently grand sum of £41 a week. Asylum accommodation is extremely grim as a general rule, and we've had hundreds, I think maybe even thousands of people who've been stuck in like hotels. So, you've only got a tiny little room, which was obviously particularly horrendous during the pandemic. You can't cook for yourself. It's not a very nice way to live. I remember during COVID when the government brought in rules around hotel quarantine. And, all of these middle-class white people are kicking off about having to do this 2 weeks of hotel quarantine for a decision that they'd essentially taken to travel outside the UK and come back. And, they talk about how awful it is to be stuck in a hotel for those 2 weeks, whereas, people seeking asylum, they are having to live there. I mean, sure, they're a bit more free to come and go than people were during hotel quarantine, but I mean, they're there for a lot longer, and it is just a really unpleasant place to stay.
Many of the people that come to the United States seeking asylum have family or they have a place to stay. Like they don't need accommodations. Is that the same in the UK or? If they have family or a place to stay, can they go or are they restricted to?
Yes. No, they absolutely can. As long as they're not detained, then they can go and stay wherever. Like the accommodation is only provided if needed. So it's not mandatory, not at this stage. That is something we are edging towards at the moment as well, which is the use of large scale accommodation or reception centres. But at the moment, no, people, if they've got family, if they've got anyone they can stay with, then they can. And in that situation, they can claim just the financial support, which is the 41.
And when can they legally work in the UK?
After their asylum claim has been outstanding for 1 year, okay, they can apply for permission to work. That is assuming that the delay in that decision being made is not down to them. So, for example, like they've not missed an interview date or anything like that. So then they can apply for permission to work. And if that is granted, then they are only allowed to work in jobs that are on the shortage occupation list, which is things like, brain surgeon, rocket scientist. Although, fortunately, because of the difficulties we are having in the UK now in relation to employing people following Brexit, they have been adding more jobs to the shortage occupation list. For example, care workers were added last year. And so we do know some people who are seeking asylum who've been able to get jobs as care workers, which is good for them. Although then it's difficult because if you are in receipt of asylum support and accommodation, you risk by earning potentially taking yourself out of financial eligibility for the accommodation. And then if you're not earning enough through your care work to pay for somewhere else, then actually, it's potentially a risky situation.
So, well, you mentioned Brexit, right? Brexit was kind of a big deal for you all. And what I noticed, you guys have, I guess, for lack of a better term, you have your own villains, right? We have Trump, we have Stephen Miller, we have Governor Abbott from Texas. So why don't you give the American listening audience just a rundown of some of your top villains that you have there?
Well, Boris Johnson has already been mentioned, so he is certainly a top villain. Our main villain, as far as immigration and asylum work is concerned, is our Home Secretary. Her name is Priti Patel. She'll be out of a job, I imagine, in a month or so. But, there are potentially worse candidates lined up behind her already, so things can and probably will still get worse. Those are the main two as far as we're concerned. I mean, really, it's the Home Secretary who drives a lot of this, although I know that Boris Johnson apparently has been quite involved in a lot of the stuff around the channel crossings, for example, the Rwanda agreement, which we're going to talk about later.
It's interesting that going back to the employment situation, we also have a 6-month waiting period between when you apply and when you can apply for a work permit. When you submit your asylum application and when you're eligible to apply for a work permit, here it's 6 months. Trump tried to change it to a year as a deterrent, to get people to understand, like, if you come here, it's going to be super hard for you to work. But it is interesting that here, our asylum system is almost a part, like a cog in our so-called low-skill employment scheme. I live in an agricultural area, And the people coming to seek asylum are a necessary part of that economy, even before they get their work permits. It's just understood, like, we're going to let a critical number of people in, and we understand that they're going to go into these so-called low-skilled industries. But in the UK, they're not allowed to do that. They would be required to fill what sounds like what we would call high-skilled positions. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, but essentially it's more punitive because they are saying, okay, fine, you can have permission to work, but only in these jobs that we know literally no one can do.
Right.
So that was in response to a legal challenge, basically. I think it was about 2010 that the government lost a legal challenge about people making fresh asylum claims. So after their initial claim had been unsuccessful, if they get more evidence and they're able to bring a fresh claim, then it was a challenge about those people also being allowed to work after they've been waiting for a year. That case was successful, and the government's response was to say, fine, we have to grant you all permission to work after a year, but we are restricting it to like these couple of jobs, and that's it. So if you can't do those, so, it's permission to work in theory, but in reality, it's not really permission to work for most people.
Is there a large irregular workforce, those working without permission?
I don't think it's as much as it is in the States, just because it is very difficult with employer checks that they have to do, large fines if they're found to be employing anyone without the right papers. But what that does instead is it drives it underground, and, it leads to more exploitation of people, because if you're working like off the books, then obviously you are going to be more exploited because you don't have any rights.
So one thing that I think we kind of moan and complain about the system here, and we're doing a lot of bad stuff here. But the thing that kind of shocked me, and I don't know why, but is your country's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. See, when I first read it, I thought it was a joke. Like, I thought it was parody. This is someone, making a funny thing, they're being sarcastic. But that's the real thing that you all are trying to do. Not you're trying to stop them, right? But your government thinks this is a good idea to take vulnerable people who are seeking asylum and send them to Rwanda, which the last time I checked was not the most stable and best government in the world. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, this, for me, it was unfortunately not a surprise because, I think we're starting from about 2 years ago now. I don't know, time is meaningless. But after the 2019 election at some point, the government started describing the things that they wanted to do in relation to asylum. And a lot of what they were saying echoed for me because I used to live in Australia, and so I know a lot about the Australian asylum system. And talking about things like temporary protection status for certain groups of refugees. And, they started to mention sort of offshoring and people being inadmissible to the asylum system. So, alarm bells have been going off for a while. But, I have still been in denial. I was just like, no, I just don't see how they're going to do it. I don't think they will. It's too far. So I was also shocked, but also not that surprised. I don't know. It's just that there are always new depths to plumb at the moment. But yeah, so it's, I think, the 14th of March that the government announced this memorandum of understanding with Rwanda, whereby they would send people who come to the UK seeking asylum. Instead, they would be put into detention and put on a plane to Rwanda. The UK government is paying Rwanda £120 million for that. Initially, Boris Johnson said that Rwanda would be taking tens of thousands of people from us in exchange for that money. The Rwandan government has since said they can take 200.
200 in total, not 200,000, 200.
No, 200.
Oh.
Okay, well,
that's a pretty good deal for them, it sounds like. But Trump did something very similar with, I don't even remember what it was called, where we were taking people and sending them
to Guatemala.
Sending them to Guatemala to apply for asylum in a country that we routinely grant asylum from.
Yeah, because, Rwanda just kind of, it seems like maybe it was a long time ago. It was in my lifetime. I remember the word genocide and Rwanda going together. So I kind of thought that wouldn't be a good fit.
Well, it's not. And, particularly for certain groups like LGBTQI plus people who I work with, Rwanda is a source country. It creates refugees because of the people that are persecuted based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that is something that is currently happening. And also, Rwanda seems to be in a war or potentially about to be in a war with the DRC. I've seen something about them, making refugees go and fight for them or something. I mean, Rwanda is not a safe country for anyone. So this Rwanda agreement is being litigated at the moment, and loads of interesting things have been coming out in disclosure. And one of those is that the Foreign Office, so that's, another department of our government who work on overseas issues, and they were against this agreement being signed because they said it's going to make it really difficult for us to raise Rwanda's human rights violations when we're sending people there and claiming that it's safe.
Right.
And what was the public sentiment?
I think most people are against it. And I've even seen it raised as a concern amongst Tory members who are not the right-wing extremists. We do have a lot of right-wing extremists who are very vocal about these things. And, we have the media, so the Daily Mail and the Telegraph in particular are extremely problematic, and they're really pushing this Rwanda agreement as a solution. The problem is that it's the Tory members who have been very vocal in support of the agreement. They are the ones choosing the next prime minister. So, both of the candidates for the next prime minister has said that they would at least continue the Rwanda scheme, if not expand it. So I do think, as a general rule, people do not support it, particularly the £120 million being spent on this while we are sort of in the depths of a cost of living crisis that is only going to get worse.
Is there any argument that it's a humane policy for the refugees being made by the Tories, or is it simply
yes,
just kind of get them out of here and not our problem?
No, what they're claiming is that it will have a deterrent effect, and thereby it will mean fewer people taking dangerous journeys across the English Channel from France, because that is the group of people who are being targeted with this policy. So that is what they are saying. However, this has not made a dent in the people arriving by small boat. The numbers this year, we're already at record numbers. And, I think particularly now the Rwandan government has said they're only going to take 200 people. I mean, who's that going to deter?
Why would someone bypass the other parts of Europe and go to the UK? What is, in here we have people that cross through El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico to get to the United States. And there we're having people that are bypassing, which I would, no offense, but I think the better part of Europe. Well, why?
None taken.
What draws them to the UK? Is it family connections or?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it before. A lot of people will have family here. So absolutely having family in the UK is one reason. Speaking English is another reason. Sometimes it's just having colonial links to the UK and feeling more of a connection for that reason. For LGBTQI plus people, a lot of countries in Europe are extremely hostile. And so obviously you wouldn't want to stay in Hungary or Poland or Romania if you're queer. So, it could be a variety of reasons, basically. But I mean, it's not that most people who come through Europe are coming to the UK, because they're not. We're an island. We're the furthest bit away from where everyone's coming in. So, yeah, this is not the problem that it's being made out to be by the government.
We've talked on this show before about how it's very short-sighted to blame our problems on Trump. I mean, we had a thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act and a thing called slavery. And so we've had a long storied history of being anti-immigrant in a diverse set of ways. But Trump did do a thing where he created, I think, as practitioners in particular, a total sense of chaos. I mean, at the end of his administration, Matthew and I and other colleagues would be sending around messages like, what is the fee for the work permit right now? Because it was raised, but then there was litigation in the state of Maryland. And then, you have to be a member of this group to be a part of the thing. And by the end of 4 years, we had it was just chaos. And a lot of that chaos lives on and will probably continue to live on. And I'm wondering in the UK, if what you're seeing, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you're not surprised by it. And so I guess I'm wondering if there was a similar sort of acceleration in recent history, or if this is just something that's kind of always been part of your history.
It's definitely always been part of our history, but it's also been an acceleration since Boris Johnson was elected in 2019. The Rwanda agreement in particular is actually a product of Brexit in a way, because when we were still part of the EU, there was an agreement called the Dublin Regulations, whereby European countries, they can basically pass people around within the EU. So if someone has come from Germany, but they have been fingerprinted in Italy, then Germany could send them back to Italy. In theory, that obviously means that the entry countries, Greece and Italy, for the most part, bear the brunt of the numbers of people coming in. So there has been litigation previously around the suitability of returns to Italy and Greece because those countries were so overwhelmed and they just were not able to look after people properly. But also it means that, you know, if you're in one country in the EU and you've got family in another country, then you could move around for that way. So the UK, it used to allow families to reunite in the UK under the Dublin regulations, but it also allowed the UK to send people back to other parts of Europe. If they could fingerprint people and find out actually this person has been fingerprinted in France or Germany, then they can put them on a plane and send them back there. When Brexit happened, those regulations ceased to apply to the UK. So the UK lost the ability to return those people to Europe in, I think it was the second half of 2020, pandemic first half. When flights started again in 2020, the UK was running about 2 charter flights a week, sending people seeking asylum back to European countries under that Dublin agreement. And yeah, since 2021, removals have pretty much ground to a halt because no one in Europe will take people from the UK anymore. So that's why they've had to sort of scout around and find somewhere else that they can send people. And that's how the Rwanda agreement came around. So the acceleration is definitely linked to Brexit, basically.
And so, I mean, I think Brexit is so fascinating. I was just reading recently that some people in the UK were getting upset with long lines going into France from taking a train in or whatnot, because France was, you know, checking everyone's passport to come in. I guess maybe that wasn't thought of. Was there a sense for some people in the UK that even with Brexit, you would still kind of reap the benefits of those types of loose benefits with Europe in whole? Or
yeah, I think some people were just very deceived about the importance of the UK and its citizens to the rest of the EU. And I mean, if we're going to be as intransigent as we have been, then, you know, things are going to be more difficult for us. And that is the approach that the government has taken towards Brexit. So that's why things are as hard as they are. They don't need to be like that. That's the result of decisions deliberately being made by the government. But absolutely, there are people who voted and supported Brexit who just did not conceive of it actually affecting their lives in a negative, practical way like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I just got back from a trip. Stephen knows this very well.
Yeah, I saw you were going around.
Yeah, 3 weeks in Europe. It was very nice. I sent Stephen a lot of photos.
Yeah, I would text Matthew some work question and he just respond with like the Eiffel Tower. And I was like, just ask.
But my point was I was traveling all around the other part of Europe and no need for passports. It was very nice. It was, and then I read that story about, you know, UK citizens complaining about long lines getting into France. And I'm like, you guys had it. You had it all. You had it all.
Yeah, we did have it all. Now we have nothing.
I was, this weekend, I was at my parents' place, and my dad is sort of a boring conservative who wrote in Mitt Romney because he didn't like Trump, but he also thought Biden was a socialist, you know, one of these guys. And our political information system is so stratified that we sat down and at one point he said, you know, with what you do, now that the border is open and there's no border enforcement, when these people are coming in, do they come to you to get help? And he really believes, because of the news that he watches, that there's been some sort of stand down order from Joe Biden, the open border socialist, and folks are now just free to wade across the river, and there's buses picking them up and, taking them wherever they want to go. And it's hard to unring that bell in his mind. Like I tried to sort of walk him through it, but it was totally paradigm shift. His mind couldn't handle it basically because of how much disinformation he's consumed. And I'm wondering if there's a similar dynamic in the UK and what it is that people on the other side are believing about what's going on in your country.
Well, I think the main sort of narrative around people who are coming via small boat across the channel is that they are economic migrants and they are not genuine refugees, as the tabloids like to refer to them. That is completely incorrect. I mean, the proportion of people who are granted refugee status who come via those small boats, it's huge. It's something like 80% or something. And we're talking about people from Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, the countries where you expect refugees to be coming from. So, yeah, I think the biggest sort of myth is that these people are economic migrants and they are not people who are genuinely in need of asylum, which they are for the most part.
So when they come over from Iran or Syria or Afghanistan, and they're in the process to have their claims heard, from your perspective, do you think they get a fair hearing, adjudication? Do you quabbles with how things are adjudicated, or do you think that goes well? Because here in the States, it can vary so widely. You get one judge in one court and a judge who will rule one way and a judge down the hallway will rule completely different. Like Stephen was saying, things are changing all the time. So, what was asylum today won't be asylum tomorrow, and it wasn't asylum yesterday.
A good example of that, I've got a client who's scheduled for a hearing in New York, but she's since moved to Washington, which is on the other side of the country. But I looked up, grant rate is like 76%. And all the judges in Seattle, where we would presumably have to change venue, their grant rate is down below 30%. And so now we've got to make this decision about maybe you move back to New York.
Yeah, we have the same problem here. So, there will be some judges, and if you end up with your client in front of them, you'll just say, look, this is not going to go very well. So, yeah, absolutely the same problem. And I was looking, there's been some reporting that's come out of Australia, I think in the last week, around data and appeals allowed by judges. And it also has sort of political affiliation and who appointed them from which political party. And yeah, so that's really interesting to look at as well. We don't have that sort of quality of data. They got it for the Australian report via Freedom of Information request. But I'd be fascinated to see something like that for the UK. But absolutely, it is a problem. Not with every judge, but with a lot of judges. And, it's also the same with the Home Office decision maker or the person who's interviewing. Some of them are absolutely fine. Some of them are just horror shows, really aggressive, and some even seem like they're actively trying to re-traumatize people. So yeah, I've read some really terrible interview transcripts, and again, because I work with LGBTQI+ people, a lot of them being asked to explain how you're gay is obviously something that not everyone finds very easy. And so I think some Home Office interviewers struggle as well. And so you see some really concerning things in some transcripts, and then also in some Home Office decisions, and then also in some tribunal decisions. So yeah, I think we have the same problem basically.
Well, I think what drives a lot of it here is, and you'll read a lot of it in the news, is the thought that so many of these claims are fraudulent, that they're just making these up. And I try to stress to the government attorneys and to judges, lots of times I'll kind of be, hitting that way. And I'll be like, listen, if we were going to make something up, it would be a lot better than what we got right now. And the vast majority of my clients, they just don't exaggerate. They don't make things up. They don't, and sometimes they're talking to you and you're wishing they would say something why don't you, would it be good if this had happened, or, they'll say, well, what happened? You called the police. And they're like, oh, they came and they were very helpful.
Yeah.
They looked, and I'm like, are you sure? Because maybe they weren't helpful. No, they were very helpful. And, so is a lot of what's behind it. I mean, other than xenophobia and racism and all that, well, that's kind of mixed in. But is it the thought process that a lot of these claims are fraudulent or just being made up by like smart solicitors like you, which we get?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think that's the view that the tabloids have, but the grant rate is quite high for people who are seeking asylum here. So I don't think it's fraudulent that they think is happening, but I mean, it's just disbelief, essentially. So I don't know if they necessarily think it's deliberately fraudulent. It's not sort of terminology they use in refusal letters, but it is just, we don't believe you, or actually it's safe where you've come from. It's absolutely fine for you to go back to Syria. Why are you complaining?
Do you see much fraud? I mean, I personally, in my practice, don't, but I know I've talked to one of the judges in Seattle who told me that they will get these sort of pre-packaged Indian cases where the evidence is all like exactly the same, and they came through the same route, down to Panama and then on up. And there do seem to be in certain communities, maybe I almost spoke Spanish, in certain communities, places where you can go to help prepare these kinds of claims. Again, it's not something I've seen, but it's something I've heard judges complain about. Do you have any sense whether or not that sort of pre-canned kind of case exists over there?
Yeah, that is an issue that exists. I was trying to remember as you were talking, I think there was a case it was a regulatory case against someone who either was a lawyer or was pretending to be a lawyer. And I think they were churning out those cases. I think it was for people from China, but it was the same sort of thing. And they were charging an absolute fortune. And these people were being removed from the UK because either they didn't have a case or their case was just not prepared properly by this lawyer. So, I mean, the term fraudulent, I think, is better applied to some lawyers than to the people themselves.
Sure, right.
But yeah, no, so that we do have an issue with quality of legal representation in some cases. It's something that I only see once everything has gone wrong, and if the person then manages to make their way, to a proper lawyer, then we have to try and unpick all of that mess and see if anything can be salvaged.
I see that with a lot of Matthew's old clients.
Do you have we have like an immigration bar, so to speak. It's kind of not formal, but most immigration attorneys really only do immigration, probably because it's so complex, or from my point of view, I'm kind of too lazy to learn anything else. So is it the same in the UK?
For solicitors, it's quite normal to only do immigration and asylum. For barristers, they might do a few other areas, not least because the pay is so bad if you're doing legal aid, asylum, or immigration. So you really need to subsidize that with some properly paid work. But yeah, it varies. But for solicitors, mainly you would just be doing immigration or asylum work.
In your asylum law, we have the main thing in our asylum law, I think that kind of is the biggest kind of sticking point for, at least for my cases, is a particular social group claim, not a political claim and all that. Do you have the same concept there in the UK where? Yeah,
we do have a particular social group because obviously it's one of the convention reasons. It's not something that I've ever had a problem in proving, basically. Apart from, I think there was an issue around trafficking at some point, but I don't really remember. But in general, that's not a reason for refusal that we see very often. You're not a member of a PSG. I mean, especially because, again, I work with LGBTQIA plus people, and it's accepted that they are a member of a PSG, so that's fine.
Yeah, and we will lose cases based on not saying the magic words for whatever particular social group the judge was looking for. You might say women who can't leave an abusive relationship. And I'll be like, no, you can't say abusive relationship because that persecution is in there. So it should be women who can't leave a domestic relationship, but you didn't say that, so you lose. So that's the kind of...
No, we don't have anything like that.
Oh, good.
Don't give them ideas.
Good. Okay. So
yeah. Business owners from rural Michoacan is overly broad, but registered business owners is sufficiently. No, I mean, so
we'll give like a legal memo, and I'll list like 6 or 7 variations of essentially the same thing. It's quite ridiculous.
In my experience, judges are pretty good about. I've had them like after my closing restructure my social group, and I'll be like, yeah, I don't care. Like call it whatever you want. I don't know that I've had one denied because I didn't quite word it right, but it does happen. And we do have a lot of cases from, Mexico, Central America, where people have been threatened, extorted. And, the issue is that being threatened isn't necessarily a social group. And so we do sometimes have a hard time fitting the reality in Central America into the laws that exist.
Or that it's all criminal activity.
Right. You were threatened for, financial gain, not because you are a certain way. So that seems to be one of our major sticking points.
No, I mean, the only sort of PSG issue I can think of in the last few years was when there was a case that successfully had, I think it was disabled men in Afghanistan or something, recognized as a PSG. But it's not an issue that arises very often for us.
Interesting. Yeah, well, we don't want to take up too much of your time. We appreciate you coming on, and it's a really good conversation. Keep up the good fight over there.
Stephen, have we decided?
I was going to say, did I win or lose? As the case may be.
I mean, you guys.
I think we get last place.
I don't know. I mean, you guys actually at least try to provide asylum seekers with shelter and money, though it's probably not sufficient. We ship our refugees. We put them on buses, and we just send them places that they don't know where they're going, like to New York City or to Washington, D.C.
No, we do that as well.
Okay.
Like the asylum accommodation, it's not like in London. People could end up in rural Wales.
But when we get off the bus, they have somewhere to go.
Yes.
Ours don't.
I really want to win this.
I mean, look.
I feel like I'm letting down my sector.
Well, I will have to say, because I've seen a lot of your villains, so to speak. You mentioned Priti Patel, and I think there are a few others. I notice a lot of people of color are particularly awful. So I think that the UK, you guys are empowering people of color to be just as awful as white people. So I think that's that's empowering.
Progress.
That's probably.
Yeah, I think the Rwanda thing puts it over the edge. Although
I think so.
It's pretty bad.
The fact that they came down to 200 puts it.
Well, no, Rwanda did, not you guys.
Yeah, Rwanda did.
Oh, right. So I guess, and Rwanda could always lift that cap at some point. So if Rwanda's like in a war and sending asylum applicants to the front lines, and you guys are continue to put them on the planes,
exactly. Come on.
Then I mean, it's
then we win.
80% approval rate
for what?
For, you said refugee applications, right?
Oh,
I think it's there 70, 80%. I can't remember exactly.
Pretty high.
I mean, there are places in the United States where it's almost zero.
Yeah, that means, we are sending refugees to Rwanda instead of giving them status and letting them build their lives here.
Oh, I don't know.
They do have to wait a year for a work permit, and then they can only work if they're like a brain surgeon. So
exactly.
That's pretty bad.
And what about delays? How long do cases take to process over there?
Oh, I mean,
years?
It depends, because
5, 6 years.
Okay, that's the tie then.
Every couple of years they do a reset. So right now they have something called the dedicated docket, where if you came in, I think it's after November of last year, the goal is to get your case done in 300 days. And they're,
oh my God, this is hilarious.
They are working those cases through. So people who came in November of last year have had 3 or 4 hearings by now, whereas people who came in 2019 maybe have had 0 hearings. So it's a really cool kaleidoscope of processing dates depending on.
Yeah, we've tied you there as well. Our date is the 28th of June, 2022, and they call everyone who's arrived since then. I think that's in the new asylum operating model or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone else is in the, we're not worried about you. We're going to focus on getting these new cases processed.
Yeah. How often do they, because they do that here every couple of years.
No, again, it's something they do not every couple of years, but it's happened a few times since I've been.
And it works every time.
Yeah.
Yep.
I still have clients from the Rocket Docket from like 2016.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna, because of Rwanda and because you're our guest and the whole like work issue.
That's crazy to me. Yeah. That's really, but that's maybe the Rwanda thing is close enough to our Guatemala thing that, okay. But the work thing, the fact that all my clients, like, they're just begging to work in the fields and they can finally get their work permit and go do that. The fact that, like, you guys don't have anything like that, I don't know. That puts you guys over the edge, I think.
We'll give it to the UK, but you know what? Maybe we need someone from Australia. So UK compared to Australia.
We're going to do a whole bracket, like a tournament.
No, I think it's really good. So yeah, you should get in touch with someone from maybe the Caldor Centre in Oz, and they can try and get first place.
Nice.
Yeah.
I still think you're pretty bad. We're pretty bad.
How about we get Rwanda immigration attorney?
Well, I mean, good luck finding one. There seems to be like one in the country or something because most of the people in Rwanda are just granted asylum on a prima facie basis. Like, there's no individual case consideration. So they don't have the infrastructure to even consider and process these asylum claims that they.
So they win just by getting to Rwanda?
No, they may not even be able to claim.
Oh.
If people are trying to claim on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, UNHCR says they are verbally rejected. They're not even allowed to register their claim.
Okay, so we're going to put UK at number one so far. You get the number one seed, but I don't know. I think Australia probably has a good claim.
Yeah, I mean, Australia has really been the building blocks for a lot of what's happening in the UK now. So I do think that they should carry the can for a lot of this, and they should get,
So any Australian attorneys or solicitors, whatever you call y'all, from there, up,
down.
All right.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Well, Sonia, it was great having you on, and we should do this again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
All right. Well, take care. Thank you.
Bye.